Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. First off, on behalf of Summit County as well as Akron Community Foundation, we want to first off congratulate you on receiving one of the COVID-19 either nonprofit or arts and culture grant program grants. We are very happy to say that probably 90% of the checks are in the mail, and you could expect those anytime now. For those of you who have completed your grant agreement, and for those of you who have submitted all the correct information that is needed. So hopefully you get those checks starting today if you have not already. So our goal is to get those out as quickly as possible. If you have not submitted your grant agreement, we ask you to please do so as soon as possible. And if you have any questions about that, we're going to share an email address with you a little later that's going to be able to give you the directions on how to go about doing that. So next slide. So we're here to discuss the Summit County CARES Nonprofit Assistance Program grants. Again, these are for arts and culture organizations, as well as for nonprofit organizations, and also in collaboration with Summit DD, who provided us some funding to provide to Summit County Development of Disabilities organizations. So again, congratulations on receiving your grant. We do want to put in a disclaimer before we begin. And next slide, please. That the material in today's webinar is provided as information only. Nothing in this webinar and none of the advice provided by the discussion today should be taken as accounting, financial, or legal advice. Today's discussion is based on our experience in administering the grant program, and we ask you if you have any legal questions, please consult with your legal, accounting, or financial advisors on specific issues related to your organization. We are going to take questions via chat today, so if you have questions as we go through this process, please type them in the chat feature, and Dawn Meglin will be monitoring that, and we'll be asking those questions once our presentation is complete. If you want to talk to us further, again, we'll share with you that email address for you to send information to, send questions to, and then we'll be able to get you your answers as quickly as possible. Next slide. Again, to talk about the purpose of the grant, these were funding opportunities for nonprofits as well as arts and culture organizations for operating and to retain as many jobs for Summit County residents as possible in light of the severe economic hardships brought to all of us by the COVID-19 pandemic. The primary objective of the program is to minimize long-term economic hardships to Summit County residents that may result from the COVID-19 pandemic. So as we go into more specific details about the purpose of the grant and your specific organization, again, please keep those questions coming if you have any. And again, we'll be able to give you the email address on how to get those answered quickly. So next slide, and I'll turn it over to Brian Reitz from our ACF staff, who's going to talk to you about the eligible expenses. And we also have with us today from Summit County, John Keenan, who is from the audit department at Summit County government, as well as Phil Montgomery from Department of Job and Family Services, and we welcome them to today's conversation as well. So Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, John. You know, the purpose of today, we want to provide an overview of all of those expenses, as well as how you are going to be reporting for those expenses. Keep in mind, anybody that has received an Akron Community Foundation grant, this is unlike how we ask for those reports related to those grants. This is, you know, CARES dollars. So this is federal money that you have been awarded. And so the reporting is much more stringent, and there are no exceptions along the way. So we're going to get started. Again, we're going to keep it kind of a very high level. If you have questions, you can put it in the chat box, but we're not going to be able to answer everybody's specific questions as it might pertain to your organization, but we are here to answer those questions and help you along the way. So please write those down as they come up during this webinar, and you can always follow up with us after we are finished today. So first off, we will be sending an email later this week that will provide a link to the expense report that you will be filling out online. And Chris, if you could just hop back for me, thank you. So we will be sending that in an email to you. It's also going to be directly on our website, as well as if you're not able to reference this webinar later, you can always find it on the website by going to grant making and initiatives and looking at the Summit County COVID CARES grants. And there will be information including the guidelines, the grant agreement form. A copy of this webinar will be posted on that website for you to access at a later point in time. So we're going to go through that step by step a little bit later in the webinar here, but know that that is how you will be reporting all of your expenses. When we get into what makes an eligible expense, it's a great question, right? And a lot of you might have some questions. The first thing I'm going to say is remember to reference your application. That is what was approved by the committee. And so that's what you're going to want to go back and reference when you're looking at those types of things that you have said that you are going to use the funds for. Some examples include things like PPE, any cleaning expenses, maybe services that you have hired that you need to have additional services for cleaning, hand sanitizer, barriers that you've set up in order to be able to maintain social distancing, adaptation of programming for you to be able to maintain or adapt your program. And we can't go really into specifics of that just because there are such a broad variety of organizations on this call and on this webinar. But think about, again, the things that you have submitted in your application. That would be question 2 of the application of how you will use your funds. You also answered that question as you were filling out the grant agreement form and how you are accepting this money to use those forms. So those are some examples of COVID related expenses. There might be some additional things that enabled you to be able to host Zoom meetings, to be able to meet with clients virtually, again, that have previously been approved. If you have questions, this is when you would email us directly if you have that question. We're going to be going backwards. From March 1st is when eligible expenses begin, and all grant dollars must be expended before December 30th of 2020, this year. Absolutely no exceptions. I can't stress that enough. We also want to make sure that you are aware, we will be able to try to answer questions, but we also will be in and out of the office as the holidays approach. So please do not wait until December 29th at 11:59 when you're emailing us and asking questions saying, I need to know if I can make this purchase tomorrow if it's an eligible expense. We want you to be going backwards. Most of these expenses are on a reimbursement, so you've already made these expenses. All expenses in the report must be submitted by March 1st of 2021. Absolutely no exceptions as well. Once the grant link, the grant portal is open for you to be able to put those expenses in, you can put them in if you have expended all of your dollars ahead of time. But the last possible date is March 1st. And with that, I am going to ask our good friends at the county, I'm going to turn it over to John Keenan to talk a little bit about the documentation of those expenses that they will be looking for as they look at doing some audits of those documents. So Chris, if we can go to the next slide, and I'll introduce John Keenan, who is the Assistant Director of the Summit County Internal Audit Department. And also on the line is Phil Montgomery, Deputy Director of Finance and Budget for the Summit County Government. So I'll turn it over to you, John.
All right, thanks, Brian. Yes, I just wanted to go real quick over this slide. So like Brian said, I work for the Summit County Internal Audit Department. So after you all send in your information to them, we'll come in and we'll audit a sample of the documents that you sent in. So the first thing I have here is the expense eligibility period. So it's March 1st, 2020 through December 30th of 2020. One thing I do want to point out, and this kind of goes into maybe payroll, but make sure that the payroll expense occurs after March 1st of 2020. So in some cases, you're doing prior pay periods and then you would pay it after March 1st. Just make sure that if you do pay payroll out of this, that it's for wages that start from March 1st and after. The next section we have, it's kind of combined. So as far as the grant agreement goes, we're looking for documentation to support the expense and then documentation to support the payment. Those are kind of the two main things that we look at. So I put some examples down here just based off of the grant agreement of what you're allowed to spend the funds on, and then what the supporting documentation it is that we would be looking for. So the first bullet we have here is mortgage and rent, and it's pretty self-explanatory. We'd be looking for mortgage statements or lease agreements. Utility payments are allowed, so electric, gas, sewer, water. We'd be looking for monthly, quarterly statements, things like that. Insurance payments, we would look at the statements or policy documents that you guys would send in. Again, salaries and wages, we'd be looking for weekly, bi-weekly employee payroll statements, payroll ledgers, things along those nature. And then the last one I put in here is miscellaneous expenses. So this one's a little bit tough, but we would look for receipts, but sometimes we can't tell what those purchases were. So we ask that you at least include a description of what was purchased and why. And then the next part is the documentation to support the payment. We would be looking at canceled checks, bank statements, and whatever else you guys can send in to support that the payment was actually made. And then just the last one, the reporting requirement, is that you guys need to send in your expenses and provide the supporting documentation 90 days after you guys receive the funds.
So just as a reminder, that this, going back to that last slide here, Chris, in the guidelines of this grant, up to 50% is available for general operating, but at least 50% must be directly COVID-related expenses. And so all of the grant dollars can be for COVID-related expenses. Those should be the easy ones, certainly to be able to look backwards and find those documentations and put that forth as this grant is, the purpose of this grant, as John Garfalo mentioned at the beginning, is because of COVID. And we all realize that, you know, we're still in the midst of it right now. It's not going away anytime soon. This is helping our nonprofit friends in the community to be able to maintain and adapt their programs. So keep in mind that you do not need to submit all of that information if your grant dollars are not being expended for things such as utility payments or insurance payments. But if you are, that information will need to be uploaded to our expense form and expense report.
Hey, Brian, if I could chime in just for a second.
Yeah, please.
One of the things that I want to make sure is conveyed in this conversation is this is not your typical nonprofit grant. This is not your typical grant that you would get from Akron Community Foundation or any other foundation. This is actually federal money, which is why it has all of these more stringent requirements on them. And it is my job from a federal reporting perspective based on the county, and John and his team's job to kick the tires and make sure it's right for every dollar of the $94 million the county received. So this isn't about making it difficult to spend. We're trying to make it as easy as possible, but we at the county do have a certain amount of required documentation and support that we need to then relay back to the federal Treasury Department. So I just wanted to put that out there so that everybody's looking at this not from the traditional lens of getting a grant from a foundation. So just making sure that that's very important. The due diligence is there. John will be reviewing, but ACF is prepared to hold your hand and work together to make sure this reporting is buttoned up right where we need it to be. So we appreciate everybody's effort. On behalf of the county executive, we're very fortunate to be able to put this much money out in the community to try to help our nonprofits that do such amazing work in our community. But we do really need your assistance in making sure that we get this documented and submit it to the federal government in the right way. So thanks.
Hey, Phil, can I ask one clarifying question that if you could answer for us? Can you talk
Sure.
about if an organization has received either PPP or other CARES Act funding? Can you talk about what they can and cannot do with this funding as it relates to that?
Yeah, so you have to be really diligent about not double dipping. So if you're a nonprofit, you are obviously still eligible to receive these funds because if you're on this webinar, you've been awarded a grant. But you need to make sure from a payroll perspective that if you have received PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, you cannot use these grant dollars to pay that same payroll. So using round numbers as an example, if your payroll is $100,000 and you got a $50,000 PPP loan and you got a $50,000 nonprofit grant, of which 25,000 you're using towards payroll, which would be your 50% rule. You now have $75,000 of grant money because those PPP loans are likely to be forgiven, but you can't use that 25 for the same original 50, if that makes any sense. So you just got to make sure you're not double dipping, because PPP loans and CARES money are all still federal dollars. They're all coming from the same place, so they all need to be treated exactly the same way. So there's that, and if you got CARES money from another organization, it's the same thing. You can't use federal dollars to pay for the same expense. From the PP, back it up for a second on the PPP, the reason why we say it like that is because if the loan is forgiven, you no longer have incurred an expense. So the grant dollars for that payroll through CARES should not be supplementing PPP because there wouldn't be an expense there. John, does that clarify? Or John Keenan, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Oh, no, Phil, I think you said it. I think what we're saying too, that if you receive PPP money and it paid for 100% of your payroll already, you can't turn around and then charge this grant to that same payroll.
But just to clarify, if that PPP money paid for, say, 2 months worth of salary, then they could expend other months that were not covered by PPP, correct?
Absolutely.
Correct.
Perfect. Thank you.
As long as it's between March 1st and December 30th.
And that also, I know there are a number of folks on the call who received some money from the state for arts and culture organizations as well. It's very similar, that you can receive both grants. You just cannot use the same expenses and report those expenses for both of those grants. If you have questions about that and you did receive additional dollars, whether it's from the state for the arts and culture, please contact Nicole Mullet, who can help guide you through that. And if you just have questions in general about some of those clarifiers, please make sure you can always email us and we will help you through that. As Phil mentioned, we have the luxury of being able to help the county and kind of handhold and answer these questions, because we want everybody to succeed. We want this to go glowingly in the eyes of not only the county but anybody else that looks at it. But most importantly, we want to make sure that you are using the funds appropriately and that all those funds get expended. Keep in mind, if you receive a grant for $50,000 and you only turn in eligible expenses for $40,000, you will be required to return $10,000. So you will have to return every dollar and cent that is not used and approved as an eligible expense. And that is one thing we want to make sure that we clarify. For this program, there are absolutely no gift cards can be used. We did see some in the applications that said that they were going to provide gift cards to clients. That is not an approved expense for this program. So no gift cards whatsoever, no gas cards for this program.
The one thing I would add to that, Brian, too, not only would unspent dollars need to be returned, but if your agency is one of the ones that happens to be in the internal audit sample and any of your expenditures are deemed to be ineligible, that would also have to be repaid if they can't be reclassified to an eligible expense.
And thank you for mentioning that as well. And that is why we again want to make sure that we have ample time and able to tell you how this is working, those documented, the documentation that we will need, as well as eligible expenses. So that way, by the time we get to March 1st and everybody's reporting window is closed, we both, on both sides, feel competent and confident that the expenses have been utilized correctly. Okay, now we're going to move along and kind of show you what that expense report is actually going to look like. And you'll see that it is an online reporting. We do not want copies in the mail. We don't want them hand delivered, certainly in light of COVID. So we've made this available online. Please note that anything that you are submitting is being done through a secured form, and all of that documentation is being housed in a secure folder that only a handful of authorized individuals have access to. So if in case you do submit information that has bank account information or social security information when you're verifying payroll, that is secured. Please, of course, do be mindful of the information that you are submitting, but please know that that is going to be secure. So when you click on that link, or when you click through the website, this is what you will see on the screen on your web page. Right at the beginning, there's some information, again, reminding you that all of this needs to be turned in no later than March 1st of 2021. We ask that you submit all of your documentation all at once. This will be the easiest way. Keep in mind, we have a couple hundred grantees, so we want to make sure that we are able to keep all of your documentation along with your organization. So we ask that you submit it all at once. If you have to make some changes along the way, then that you do have that ability. We can manually make those changes. We would just ask that you would send us an email. So the top information is the basic information that you have already submitted with your grant agreement. We ask that you fulfill that again. Your address, the contact name, contact phone number, and contact email. This next piece is something that we do need. Every single organization needs to verify that at least 50% of your staff or board reside in Summit County. Now, when you filled out your application, everybody had to check yes, or if you checked no, then that made you ineligible. So obviously everyone checked yes. But for this process, we do require that you verify that information. So you will be submitting that if you have staff, you must submit that staff information, including residency. If you are an all-volunteer organization, then you would need to provide board information in that section. We want to make sure that you're aware of that, and so you can gather that information now so that you can submit that when the time comes. You will be asked to fill out the grant amount received, and then we move on now to, this is the section that you will be filling out for the expense report. This is the exact information that you saw in Exhibit A of the grant agreement form, as well as information when you were filling out the application for this grant. You will go line by line and input those expenses. So you'll write the date of the payment, the name of the payee or the organization or the company or the individual if it's a salary. If there's an invoice number, we ask you to put that in there. The purpose of the expense. It may be simply COVID-related expense. It might be direct service of adapted program. Whatever you are going to be expensing, put that purpose in, because that's how we will be verifying what that expense is to that purpose. The check number, if there is a check number, and then verification attached. You are able to have up to 30 entries If you need to submit more than 30 entries, you can send that to us via email, and we can manually include that information and upload that to your folder. There's also a limit of 10 megabytes for the total amount of the files, but you'll see just below as you put the expense in, then you add the supporting documents. If, let's say, you are submitting your salary, you would be able to submit your payroll. What we are going to ask is that you highlight those documents and make any notation so that as we are looking through it as Akron Community Foundation to make sure those are verified, and then ultimately as John and his team at the county and anybody further on, they can easily reference those supporting documents with those eligible expenses as you list. When we are looking at the reporting side of it, these will all be listed out as an expense report as you might turn in at work. And it will look as similar as the Exhibit A that you have seen. So it will have each individual expense as well as the verification document attached to it. After you've submitted everything, then we ask that you provide a signature. You date that signature and then click submit after you verify, of course, you're a human. And you will receive an email with a copy of that information saying that it has been submitted. Again, once this is submitted, then Akron Community Foundation will receive these reports. We will be able to take a look at all of that documentation, and we will be able to start to verify some of those expenses and make sure that everything that we need matches up with those expenses. Again, we will be sending the link out via email later this week. It will be available through a hot link on our website as well. And this will be available until March 1st. You do not have to jump in right now, of course, and say that unless you have expended all of your dollars, then you can turn that in right now, but you do have until March 1st. So if you have questions, you can email CARESinfo at akroncf.org. We cannot stress enough, all of these grant dollars must be expended by December 30th. And I think there has been some questions that just being the delay of the Postal Service that we've seen, if you do not cash your check per se until the new year, that is okay. What we're saying is that all expenses have to be made prior to December 30th. We're in light of what's happening with COVID, we are just not able to provide any sort of pickup options. So those are going out in the mail, and we're hoping that those get to you as soon as possible. Expenses have to be made by December 30th. If you are not able to put the check into your checking account until 2021, that is okay. It does not mean that you are disqualified from holding on to those dollars. Phil or John, anything else you might want to add there again?
No, I think you nailed it. I mean, just to keep hammering on that, the expenses have to be incurred by 12/30. Every email from us will probably have that as a tagline at the bottom.
Yeah, and one of the things too, with documentation that the nonprofits are sending in, just make sure, if it's a mortgage statement, it's a utility statement, something like that, that it has the actual nonprofit's name. We want to verify that it is an actual nonprofit expense. So just make sure that the statement would say something like that.
I did see a question early on. Somebody asked about the mail in Akron, Summit County, that they see trucks lined up and they see mail is delayed. If that is the case, if you have not received your check, say within the next couple weeks, please reach out to us and let us know. Again, I mailed out 128 checks on Thursday. I've heard some people receive them, but I didn't hear from all 128. Not that you needed to let me know, but some people said they did receive their check. So if for some reason you have not received your check within a reasonable time period, let us know, and we'll try to work on another solution.
So with that, I know there have been a number of questions coming in. I have not been able to keep eye on that. I know there might be a lot of specific organizations questions that you're looking at that we're not able to get into at this level right now. But I'm going to ask Dawn if there's any questions that maybe you've seen come up here that we just want to clarify. And while she's doing that, again, CARESinfo@akroncf.org is the email that you would want to use. We will respond as soon as possible to those questions. And again, we want to be here to help you. Keep in mind that we might not have 100% recollection or knowledge of your application as it pertains to your organization. So we might need to, have a conversation on the phone after, just to refresh ourselves and make sure that we're offering the best advice that we can provide. Please remember, though, this is these dollars that have been accepted as your organization and your board of directors. So if you have any legal or financial questions, we ask that you fall back on them for those professional questions that you might have and that advice that they may have along the way. Please do not contact the county with your questions as it pertains to this grant and the expense reform. We will be that mediator if there needs to be a follow-up with the county, but we ask that you please do not reach out to them. Akron Community Foundation is administering this grant on behalf of the county, so we are your direct contact at CARESinfo@akroncf.org.
Questions? Dawn.
Okay, so I'm going to try and touch on some of the questions that were asked multiple times, since that indicates there's some confusion out there. Some of you have submitted very detailed questions. We will try and get back in touch with you individually regarding those specific questions. One was regarding sending a check in December, but it doesn't get cashed until January. Does this count as spent? And the same goes for credit card purchases made in December, but it doesn't show up until a January invoice. Are those eligible to submit as expenses?
Those would be eligible as long as they were incurred by December 30th.
Okay. The next one, we received several questions regarding 1099 and contract employees and paying them out of this fund or requiring documentation for such, and what was allowed.
John, you can correct me if I misspeak, but I mean, I would assume a copy of the 1099 with the employee's address on it would substantiate that they are a 1099 employee in terms of determining their address. A copy of the canceled check for a 1099 payment would, John, I don't know how you guys are looking at that in lieu of payroll records.
Like you said, Phil, those documents, and then, if there's a job description or something else that they're doing for you, to kind of prove, of what they're working for you on, we would also look at that.
Yeah, a contract or agreement, something to substantiate that they are a 1099.
Okay. And we received several questions regarding proof of a client struggling with COVID or the pandemic. Do we require any evidence that the clients they are serving are suffering from the pandemic? And are we required to submit a copy of that client's bills and lease agreement if we're paying their rent or utilities?
So with the Summit County CARES program, we were allowing the recipients of the mortgage and utility assistance to self-attest that they were impacted by COVID. So if you have an application that you normally use for that assistance category, you may want to just add the question, were you impacted? And I can send ACF the verbiage we use. John, are you cool with that?
Yeah, that's fine. Yep.
So yeah, if you're putting an application out there for rent, mortgage, utility assistance, I would add the question, were you impacted by COVID via either loss of employment or whatever the language is.
Would they be required to include a copy of the lease agreement of paying rent or the copy of the utility bill if they're paying the utilities for those clients?
Now, here's the question I have on that. So the short answer is yes. We require that at the county level. And actually, in thinking through the process, nonprofits that are doing rent, utility assistance, mortgage assistance, where they can, they should be making those payments directly to the landlords or the banks or the utility companies and not making them to the clients. If that is not your practice, please reach out and let us know, because that gets a little sticky.
Okay. And one of the other frequently asked questions was, can the grantee adjust the requests of their funds as the situation has changed due to the pandemic, or because they did receive additional CARES funding? Can they shift what they originally planned on funding?
Yeah, I mean, as long as, if you need to do that, I would suggest that they reach out to ACF before they pull the trigger on it. In general, as long as it is a CARES COVID-related expenditure, we're going to allow, some leeway. But then the original category of expenses that were unallowable will remain to be unallowable. So you can't, no capital improvements. Technology is going to be limited based on what we allowed in the first round. So, but in terms of you walked into this thinking you were going to put all $25,000 into payroll, and all of a sudden you got a PPP loan, then yeah, and you could come back to us and request to shift that money you had intended to use for operations to, buying plexiglass to put up dividers or buy PPE. But I would have them submit requests just to make sure that we know what the pivot is. But yes, there is definitely flexibility there.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking to see if there are some more general questions that have come in since I started speaking. Somebody did ask, if they did not spend all the money, would they have to send the unspent money back?
Absolutely.
Somebody asked, would COVID test kits qualify as PPE? I would think that if they're COVID related, I would think yes. Correct, Phil?
Yeah, if you're implementing a new program that you want to offer COVID tests to your clients, that's a new expenses related to COVID. So I would think that would be just fine.
Do contract employees that do not live in Summit County count for this grant? So if the 1099 is not a Summit County resident, can they be reimbursed out of this?
They can be, as long as your nonprofit in general has at least meets the 50% requirement. John, you agree with that?
Yes, I agree.
I know we want to be mindful of everybody's time. We appreciate you joining us. We know there are probably many more questions as well that we will be happy to answer. So please do reach out to us via CARESinfo@akroncf.org. Send us those emails, and we will continue to respond to those as fast as we are able to. And I think on behalf of Akron Community Foundation as well as the county, we appreciate all of the great work that you have continued to do since March. It's been a long year. It will continue to be a long year as we enter into 2021, but we know that we are stronger because of the work that happens here in Summit County. And we look forward to the day when we can all sit together and share a meal and have conversations in person. But until then, stay safe. and take care of everyone. And we will be in touch with you via email shortly. And have a great day. Thanks for attending, everybody.